the noted author of the book Teaching with Classroom Response Systems, Creating Active Learning in the Classroom, which was published last year, or not last year now, I guess, 2009 by Josie Bass. It was just fortunate that we could get him. He has been visiting Georgetown University and is ending his visit in the DC area with us, and so I'm delighted to have him here, and he's going to talk to you today about ways to use clickers to help promote students' critical thinking and promote deeper learning in our students. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Derek Bruff.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me like this, or should I use the mic? Good? I'm looking at the back table right now. Okay. All right. Good. Well, I'm Derek Bruff, and thank you, Linda, for having me here. Thank you, UMBC, for hosting me. I'm looking forward to a great conversation here today. I'm also looking forward to lunch at some point, but you guys go ahead. And feel free.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah. Feel free to get up and get coffee or whatever as you need to as we go. The title of today's talk is Teaching with Clickers for Deep Learning. If you go to my website, derekbruff.com, actually I meant to post these slides up there earlier today, but I'll have to do that at some point later today when I can get a wireless connection. But I'll put the visuals for my talk up on derekbruff.com. I'm also active on Twitter at derekbruff. Feel free to tweet during the session here today. It won't bother me. Just don't say anything rude. So clickers. So you may be wondering why there's a picture of a bunch of roller skates on my slide. Now, back when I was in, I'd say middle school, there was something we did. I didn't really enjoy it, but we did it, which was to go to the roller skate rink. I was not a very good skater, so I generally sat on the side and watched other people roller skate. But they had different kind of times that you could skate in the middle of the rink. There was couple skate, when you had to go out as a couple and you could skate romantically or not. There was, boys skate. There was girls skate. There was the hokey pokey, which I was awful at and never bothered with that one. But then there were these times where the announcer would say, hey, it's all skate time. And the idea with all skate time is that everyone could go skate, and you didn't have to be talented or dating someone or know how to do the hokey pokey. You could just go and skate. And so I think this is a really nice metaphor for the use of clickers, because by using clickers and having every student able to respond to multiple choice questions in class, each student has a clicker, and in some ways, each student has a voice in the classroom, is able to participate on their own independently and contribute to what's happening in the classroom. So it's an invitation and an opportunity for all students to participate equally during the classroom. And so I think that's a really powerful way to change the classroom dynamic, and so that's what we're going to be exploring today. First, a couple of clicker questions to warm up. Now you'll see you've got some clickers on your table. We didn't have enough to go around, so you'll have to share a little bit. So this is your first question. How experienced are you in teaching with clickers? A, I've not used clickers at all. B, I'm just getting started with clickers. C, I'm comfortable with the basics. D, I'm a power user. So go ahead and grab a clicker. All you should have to do in your clicker is press the letter of your answer, A, B, C, or D. There's no on button. There's no enter button. You just press the button. Now you can see up here, for those of you who haven't used this system, yeah, I wish we had a little more, but you may have to kind of take turns a little bit as we go. In a minute, I'll actually have you collaborate, and you can maybe vote as a small group. But for this one, I'm just trying to get a sense of who's in the room. You can see up in the upper right-hand corner, I've got this little toolbar that I use to initiate the polling. I'm going to close down the polling there in a second when I hit that button. We'll see a little graph of the results in a second. I also have the number of responses that are coming in. I see 29 responses, and I think we have 30 clickers in the room, so someone's lazy. Okay. All right. So let's see, at least for the 30 of you who got to vote, where you stand on this one. That's ominous. All right. So just over half of you not use clickers at all, but we do have some folks with a little bit of experience and maybe a couple of power users in the room. So that's kind of what I expected. I'll be doing a fair amount of kind of introductory stuff here today, but there will also be opportunities for those of you with some experience to share out a little bit and talk about ways that you've been using clickers too. So that's good. That gives me a little feedback, and you get to know each other a little bit. I'll also say, before I move on, there's a receiver unit. It's about the size of a thumb drive. It's plugged into my USB drive on my laptop, and that's what's collecting the signals. So you were sending little radio frequency signals from your clickers. Those signals were being collected on this little receiver unit, and then the software in my computer pulls up the bar chart. And so it's pretty simple. All right. Oops. There we go. Which of the following is the most significant challenge to engaging your students in deep learning during class? Now, I'm going to read these responses, and then what I want you to do is actually talk this one out with your neighbor. So share a little bit what makes it challenge to engage your students in class, and then vote whenever you're ready. So is it's large class size makes it easy for students not to engage?
All the above.
I'm asking you to pick one, all right? Students are hesitant to speak up in front of their peers, not like this guy. Students focus on taking notes, not engaging. Students focus too much on their grades, not enough on learning. Or E, students don't prepare adequately for class. So I'll open polling, but I want you to talk this out and vote whenever you're ready. Go.
I suspect. But that's my Your approach to this is not as naive as Right. Right. Okay. That makes it. I think that in all honesty, you guys, everybody picks up. Yeah, but it's also true.
All right, whenever you're ready, go ahead and vote. I am asking you to kind of pick one here, okay? So you've got to do a little prioritization. Think about what's the most significant of these challenges. All right, last call. Any other votes? All right. All right. 1 in 5. Okay, everything got a vote, which is good. All right, so class size, certainly an issue. And then the lack of preparation. Someone who went with either A or E, can you say a little bit about what that looks like in your situation? What makes that a challenge for you?
Just like now.
I'm sorry?
I said just like now, nobody's speaking.
It's true. I would.
Yes, in the back?
For E, I would say in a large lecture hall, a large lecture format class, a lot of the students assume all they need to do is show up and everything will be delivered to them.
Okay. And you might have a different expectation for them?
I might like that they'd actually read something ahead of time so I don't have to just stand there and tell them what I told them to read.
Okay. Okay. Other thoughts? Yes?
I think for A, I find students can hide easily in these large lecture halls. And also I think as I engage with students, many students will be willing to respond, and they can hide, others can hide behind those responses.
Ah, right.
So
Yeah.
they can just sort of not participate.
Yeah. I mean, given a large enough class size, it can feel like you have a lot of discussion in class, but you only hear from 20% of the students maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Another comment? Yes.
Well, my content area is teach Spanish, and sometimes I feel
study for that, or how to prepare that. Okay, because they want to have the same approach that they do for math or biology. And my container is different, learning a new language, so they need to find out the ways so
Right.
that can be better for them,
Yeah.
in the learning.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We'll touch a little bit on the preparation issue, and maybe we can, don't let me forget to circle back around to that. A lot of the use of clickers are kind of addressing some of the other issues there, but there are ways that clickers can help you motivate your students to prepare a little bit as well. So thanks. This, again, gives me a sense of kind of who's in the room and what some of the challenges are. Okay. So again, the idea of an all-skate and everyone participating, I'd like to start off and kind of put you in the position of some students here, okay? So we're going to do clickers kind of the way that I do clickers and a lot of other people do clickers in their classrooms on a regular basis, okay? So I'm going to pretend to be your professor and you're going to be my students. And this is my question for you. Considering that a tiny acorn can grow into a mighty oak tree, which of the following contributes the majority of the mass of the tree? The soil, the air, the water, or the sunlight? Now here's what I want you to do. Don't talk. I want you to think about this question, commit to an answer. If you're one of the first 4 people at your table to grab a clicker, send it in. Okay? If not, write it down. But think about this by yourself and commit to an answer, okay? No talking. No trash talking either.
That's much harder. Percentage of why I say because it's much higher. I know that this is my classroom.
All right, go ahead and vote. Grab a clicker. If there's a free clicker, grab one. I'd like to know what you guys think about this. I'd like you also to know each other. I'd like you to know what you guys think about this as well.
Does this count multiple?
Oh, that's a good question. Question up here. So if you hit the clicker button more than once, as long as polling is open, it will record your final answer and ignore the others. Okay, so you can change your mind, or if you're not sure and you want to hit it again to make sure, that's fine too. It'll record your final answer. All right, last call. Any other votes? If you're my actual students, I would make you suffer and wait until we got all 30. I don't have that kind of power over you. All right. Nice. Okay. So, water, most popular, but only by a nose, over air, soil, and sunlight on the board. Very interesting. Okay. Clearly, not a lot of consensus here. That's okay. Now what I want you to do is talk to each other about this question, and then we'll re-vote. Okay? So put your heads together, see if you can puzzle it out. See if maybe you can come to some consensus. If you both already agree, you could both be wrong, so talk it out anyway. Go.
Misconception question.
I just basically did my body is,
What makes up the majority of this? Doesn't matter. Dry it out, the water is gone. Great.
air. It's not air anymore.
It said what contributes the majority of the water. There's a great primer in the very beginning of the National Science about what just
All right. right. Thank you for engaging so fiercely in this question here. If you would, grab a clicker and vote. You can keep your original answer. You can change your mind, whatever you want to. Let's vote again.
Still gonna go with water, right?
They were parsing my words over there, too. All right, let's see some votes, okay? Come on. 24, good. 2 more. Please re-vote if you haven't voted already. There we go. 26. I'll take that.
Everything else.
Well, there is more consensus now that it is either air or water.
Unwilling to give up the water.
Air's taking a slight lead. Someone keeps voting sunlight.
For authenticity.
So let me hear some arguments for air or water. Yes, in the back. You had your hands going like this during the discussion.
I voted
So.
for air because that's the right answer.
Okay.
I love it. We all know that it's not really the right answer because if you start with a potted plant and you put all that soil in there and it's this big, and then it grows to be this big and you never put any more soil in it, only put in water, then it's got to be the water.
So you voted for water?
Haven't you also put in air?
So you voted for air, but your argument is for water. Okay.
Just like what happened to
Okay. Other arguments for air or for water?
Which one do you want?
Or sunlight if you really want to try, but I'll tell you now that's not the right answer.
So the carbon dioxide in air becomes the carbon-based life form that is the ocean.
Okay. Carbon dioxide in air becomes the carbon-based life form that is an oak tree. All right. Other thoughts? Other than the potted plant idea, why might someone go for water here?
I just went with the idea that a human body is made up of a certain percentage of water.
Right. Humans are like 70% water. Yeah, is that true?
Yes.
90.
90?
It's more than 70. 70.
Oh, okay.
Sounds plausible. Right, and so maybe plants are kind of made out of a lot of water too. That makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. Yeah. You guys buy the carbon dioxide argument?
Yeah.
Yeah? So, air is the right answer here. So congrats to half of you. I understand we have a number of biologists in the room, so that helped. I've asked this question in the past in a mixed group of faculty, and yeah, it's been ugly, actually. Air was sometimes the least popular answer. So if you think about it this way, during photosynthesis, the plant, the oak tree, takes in carbon dioxide and gives off oxygen. Well, where did the carbon go in that process? It came in, but it didn't go out. So that's what forms the mass of the tree. Another way to think about it, this is why burning down rainforest is a bad idea, because it releases all of the carbon from those trees into the atmosphere, leading to greenhouse gases and climate change and all that kind of other stuff, right? So I'm hoping more and more people will get this question right as we have more awareness of what role carbon plays in our Earth's environment. But thank you for participating. Nice job, everyone. You jumped right in. Let me talk a little bit about kind of what we just did. And so this is a pretty standard way of using clickers. Eric Mazur, who I understand was here last year, coined this term peer instruction. And this is kind of a standard process. There's different ways to do this, but this is pretty standard. First, I posed a question to you. I had you answer the question independently. Now, not everyone does this step, but I think it's pretty important to find out where all of your students are when they kind of walk in the room, before they have a chance to find out what the guy at the, around the table thinks about the question. What does everyone individually think about this question? I think also by asking students to answer independently, you really are saying, hey, I want all of you, not just half of you or some of you, I want all of you to think about this question, reason it through in your heads, and commit to an answer. So then after the first vote, I take a look at the results, and then I do one of three things. if most of you had answered that question correctly, if say 80 or 90% of you had gotten the right answer, then it wouldn't have been necessary to go to that stage where I had you talk about it with your neighbor. I would have just said, that's great, okay, it looks like most of you have the right answer. Let me hear a couple of explanations just to kind of confirm and get that out there. Because even if 80 or 90% of the students get it right, they may not be completely convinced of their own answers. So they need a little bit more work with the question probably. But in general, if most of the students get it right, you know you can move on fairly quickly after that. If most of the students answer incorrectly, on the other hand, 70, 80, 90% of them get it wrong, if you have them go and talk about it with their neighbors, then there aren't kind of enough good ideas in the mix to propagate well. And so they're probably not going to make much more progress on it. They need more from you at that point. And so when that happens with me, I backtrack, right? I need to give another example, provide some more explanations. I need to give them something else. Then maybe I'll ask another clicker question on the same topic a little bit later. But it definitely signals to me that they need more help with this topic, and they're not getting it. Now, I tend to try to write my questions so that we get this kind of middle category. And you guys were just perfect here. Thank you for those beautiful results from the first round, right? 2 answers, roughly equally popular. That says to me that this is something that's kind of hard but not too hard for the students. Some of them kind of got it, but some of them don't. So if I have them talk about it, a lot of the folks who don't quite get it will understand the concept from their neighbor as they talk it out. And so a lot of times, and then after that, after the pair discussion, you re-vote, and then we have a class-wide discussion. A lot of times you'll see some convergence to the right answer in that second round. Now you guys were pretty firm, air and water, but a lot of times you'll see convergence to the right answer. Sometimes you'll see convergence to the wrong answer. That's fun. Usually in those cases I say, oh look, most of you agree now. Well, you're all wrong. Let's talk about why. Yes, question?
What kind of incentives do you have for the first question and their answer? Is it just their own interest? Are there points that you're tracking? What are you doing to get them prepared?
That's a good question. And I think my answer is it depends on what's going to motivate your students to engage in the way that you want them to. So some folks who use clickers don't count them at all. They're anonymous, like you were using them. I don't know who voted what here. And for some students in some classes, that's fine. That's enough. There's enough intrinsic interest that they'll jump in and take the questions reasonably seriously. A lot of instructors will count clicker questions towards a participation grade. So you get credit, you get a point for voting, whether you're right or you're wrong. And so it's a class participation grade at that point. And so usually that ends up being maybe 5 or 10% of the course grade. So it's not huge, but it's enough to kind of make it worth their while. I had a class once, I was teaching some engineers and a statistics course, and the first semester I only had maybe 65% of the students voting on every clicker question, but I wasn't counting it for anything. And so then I moved to the participation scheme, and then I got 85, 90% of my students voting regularly. And so for them, that was enough motivation to go. Some instructors find that they need to actually count correct answers more. So you could give 1 point for a correct answer and no points for a wrong answer. That really raises the bar for class participation. And you wouldn't want to do that for necessarily every kind of question. If it's a question you kind of expect people to get wrong because you've just talked about it, that might be a little unfair. On the other hand, some folks will do a mixed scheme where they might give 2 points for a right answer and 1 point for a wrong answer. So you get some credit for trying, but a little more credit for getting the right answer. And so I think for a lot of folks, they just have to kind of figure out what's going to be the right kind of motivation for their students to engage. Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I also wanted to say, speaking of motivation, so I was running a little risk there. Usually what I do with the results of the first vote is I will often just look at them myself and not show my students. In this case, the first vote was the kind of results that I would want to show to my students. You saw that after that first vote that these 2 answers were equally popular. And so I think that motivates students to say, hey, this is a tough question. We can't come to a consensus about this. I better pay attention. I better start talking. Sometimes you'll find that, this is kind of the worst case scenario, is that 60% of the students agree on an answer, and the other students are kind of roughly equally distributed among the other answers. And if you show them a bar graph like that, a lot of students will assume that the most popular answer is the right answer. And they'll be less inclined to engage in any kind of discussion after that. So I typically preview the results myself, and then if it looks like that, I won't show them. I'll just say, oh, it looks like you guys still need some work on this. Let's talk about it and vote again. And it doesn't matter if the popular answer is the right answer, right? They'll just assume it is the right answer. So I don't show my students those kind of results. But I generally always show my students the second round of results, so they see kind of what we're dealing with. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Before I move on, I'm going to talk a lot about kind of, writing good questions. Okay. So that was a lot about one way to kind of do the process during class. But the effectiveness of how you use clickers depends a lot on the quality of your questions. Before I do that, I want to see if there are any other kind of logistical questions about implementing clickers that you might have on your mind. Yes?
How did you reset the question to start the voting and the counting again on the same question?
Oh, yeah. So the program I'm using is TurningPoint Anywhere. And so it's just this little floating toolbar. You can display your questions using whatever you want, PowerPoint, Keynote, Prezi, whatever you like. So I just have this little button. I can start a vote, and then I can stop a vote, and that's all. Yeah.
So when you stop it, it just resets it?
Yes. And what TurningPoint Anywhere will do is it'll take a screenshot of your screen so that you can look at it later and see what the question was. Yeah. Question?
You mentioned giving points. So are these clickers, like, do you get a report that shows who voted correctly and incorrectly?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. The report is generally more helpful if it has student names on it. And so there are ways to have students register their clicker. There's a unique serial number on the back of the clicker. And so, Linda, do you guys, how does that work here? Karen?
They register through Blackboard.
Oh, good. That's how we do it too.
You, using the software, can download your participant list from your Blackboard site.
It works beautifully.
Yeah. So Blackboard, when your students sign into Blackboard, Blackboard knows who they are. They just have to go in and type their serial number in, and now Blackboard knows what their serial number is. And then from the TurningPoint software, you can download a participant list from Blackboard. Yeah. And so then you can generate reports, you can upload grades back to Blackboard, that kind of thing. Good. I guess someone would ask that question. Yes?
I'm just curious, how do you preview your result without showing to the student?
Oh, how do I preview the results without showing to the students? Well, in this setup, I would do this. In my classroom, often I have one of those consoles mounted. I'll switch the display over to the other computer in the room or to the DVD or whatever it is. So they just see a blank screen, basically. And then I'll preview it on my laptop, and then I'll decide if I want to show it to them or not. Yeah.
Because right now, some of our lecture hall doesn't have the mute button anymore. So
I know. Yeah, Projector Mute is a beautiful tool. Totally underrated, but yeah, there's ways around it. One more question.
If you're using the presenter screen for your PowerPoint or whatever, it shows up on
Okay.
your laptop, but not on the big screen. So you can actually drag it off and drag it on when you want to see it.
Oh, gotcha. Nice. Okay. I'll say also, TurningPoint has another product called, well, it's kind of their main product, TurningPoint, and it integrates within PowerPoint. So if you're already a PowerPoint user, that's probably even easier to use than what I'm showing you here. And in fact, with that version of TurningPoint, I have this little remote that just lets me go forward and back in my slides, and you can actually run your clickers through this. So you hit forward, and the question pops up on a slide. Voting opens. You hit forward, and that closes the polling. You hit forward again, and the bar chart pops up. You talk about it. You hit forward again, and you go on to your next slide. So that's really nice, actually.
And I
Yeah.
just add, since we're talking about if anybody's using TurningPoint and you haven't used the results manager software that they make, it's fabulous for letting you upload the data to Blackboard and manipulate the data. We didn't use it last year, but we
Yeah. Good. Good to hear. Yes.
I assume you use the same clicker for multiple courses.
Yes. Yeah. So how do students get clickers here?
So students, when you as a faculty member place your textbook order with the bookstore, you notify them that you are requiring clickers. And then the student, when they go to buy their textbook, sees that thou shalt have a clicker, and they get one. About $40 at the bookstore now. They can also order one from online for slightly less, but they pay shipping. Most people will get it from the bookstore. And
Yeah,
if
then
you
they
are
can
a
use it for
faculty
multiple.
member and you want to use clickers in the classroom, I'll make sure that Linda sends around my email, because you need to see me and go through some training, and then you'll get
a very good clicker and a receiver before we set you loose.
The question was if you just want to use it once or twice in a semester. You don't have a lending set
No,
at this
we don't
point.
have a lending set for classes that we're not running.
Fair
That turns into a losing set.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, we have one of those too.
phones though, can't you?
Oh, do you guys do responseware at all here?
That's gonna take a really long answer. So yeah, in theory, there is software, so students could get a license and they could use an iPod Touch or a cell phone or something else. I would suggest that the majority of the biology department has banned the use of cell phones in their lecture halls, and that kind of has set the tone for lots of other classes. So we don't advise students to go that route over at the bookstore.
I will say that, for instance, at Vanderbilt, our School of Nursing hadn't really started using clickers until about a year ago, and they decided that since most of their nursing students already had laptops and were using them regularly in class, that they just went for the responseware option with Turning. And so they don't have clickers at the bookstore. The students just buy, at nursing, the students buy this license so that they can use any web-connected device as their response device. So smartphone, laptop, netbook, what have you. So let's pause on the logistics here, because I want to talk pedagogy and content and that kind of stuff. Because that's what really drives me. Okay, so good questions. Here's your next clicker question. Okay, take a minute. You got to read through it. Let me know what you think. Go ahead and vote whenever you're ready. I'm not going to read this one out loud.
No kidding.
Go ahead and vote whenever you think you got the answer. I'm sorry?
Can we answer more than one?
On your clicker, it's just going to remember your final answer for this one.
Right, but say if I want to answer A and B.
There is a mode in TurningPoint that you can allow multiple responses for the same question. So you can say which of the following are true and let them respond this way. I haven't set this question up that way though. So this is a one answer only question. All right, go ahead and vote. Last call. Let's find out what you know about Traxoline, my favorite form of Viantor. Oh, good for you. Most of you got it right. Bracturation. Fantastic. You guys know your Traxoline. Very good. Great. Okay, let me ask this. What does this question assess? Reading comprehension skills. Okay? Yeah. Comment?
It assesses your understanding of word inflections and syntax.
Exactly, yeah. Can you, I mean, this does not assess anything about your knowledge of this thing called Traxoline.
Right.
Which is good, because there is no such thing as Traxoline. This is all nonsense, right?
Yes.
Now, a couple of points here. One, not a good question, okay, in general, unless you are testing reading comprehension, in which case it's a good question, okay? I'm trying to block out the question. Another thing here, though, is I like this question, too, because I kind of feel like that when you read this question, you get the same feeling that most of our students feel when they walk into our class. What's going on? So, but also I think it would be tempting to kind of think that this is a question that's assessing some kind of knowledge of chemistry here, but really it's not. And so you have to be careful in the design of your questions to really try to uncover the things that you want to uncover. Now, I'm going to talk mostly about, well, So I just want to mention briefly, I've got one example here of a factual recall question. Now the thing is that a lot of times when people think of a multiple choice question, they think of a question like this. So in this one, which of the following is not a characteristic of romanticism? And either you know it or you don't, right? There's no discussion here. This is just a question you ask students to see if they have certain facts in their heads. This is the type of question, like I said, a lot of people think of as a multiple choice question. If you see multiple choice questions on tests, often they're like this. These questions are often really awful clicker questions because they don't do anything to engage students. There's no way they can really talk about this. Again, either they remember it or they don't. Now there's a place for this kind of question. If you're about to talk about romanticism in, let's say, your history class, like it's not a class on romanticism, but you're going to talk about romanticism today in your class, you might want to know at the beginning of class what your students remember about it. Or maybe they had a reading about romanticism, and you'd like to kind of check and make sure that they've done this. So this could be a good reading quiz question, or it could be kind of a background knowledge probe kind of question. It's not a question that's going to generate group discussion and that kind of thing. So again, there's a place for this kind of question, but I'd rather focus on more interesting questions. I will say though, because a lot of you said that one of the challenges is having students prepare for class. And so a lot of teachers do use clickers to kind of motivate that in a way. So if you give students some type of assignment, a reading assignment or a video to watch or a podcast to listen to before class, then to have some type of quiz at the beginning of class on that material, well, that's a pretty common option. One nice thing about that is that not only does it give you a way to hold your students more accountable for that pre-class preparation, but as you look at the results of those questions, you find out how much of that pre-class material they really comprehended. Okay? So a pencil and paper quiz, you could give them a reading quiz at the start of class, but then you have to grade it after class, after you've done class. Right? The data you get is not helpful at that point. It only serves for accountability. But with clickers, you get to actually review the results as they're coming in. And so you can say, oh, look, it looks like a lot of you really didn't get this definition of romanticism in the text. Let's talk about that before we move on to the rest of class. So that data that you get is really, really useful. I'll also say, and I'll just put this warning out here, if you use clickers primarily to take attendance and to give quizzes, and your students have to buy them for $40 at the bookstore, they will not like you. Because taking attendance and grading quizzes, that's just making your life easier. So why should they have to pay $40 to make your life easier? I'm speaking somewhat facetiously, but in survey after survey of students, this is a pretty consistent theme. Now, if you use clickers in a way that helps students understand the material, get feedback on their own learning, make class time more engaging, give them a chance to kind of test their own knowledge, to help prepare them for tests, those are all things that they see as valuable. And so the student reaction is generally very, very positive to clickers if they're used in those ways. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, are the types of questions you can use in class to help students really grapple with the material and to get more engaged in class discussions. So the first type of questions are what I would call misconception questions. Now, does anyone know what this is a picture of?
Yep.
Mentos and Diet Coke. So you take a roll of Mentos, the breath freshener, you put it in a Diet Coke, you get a Coke geyser. It's very exciting. If you go on YouTube and search for Mentos and Diet Coke, you can see lots and lots of fascinating videos. People trying to propel things off the ground with these geysers of Coke. You know, huge fountains with like 100 different 2 liters of Coke spurting up all at once. It's very exciting. I did this at my daughter's preschool science day a couple of years ago, and the 5-year-olds loved it. I was the cool dad that brought the exploding Coke. And the reason I show this picture is that when someone sees this, I think it's entirely natural to wonder why this works the way it does. Why is it Mentos? Why is it Diet Coke? What about regular Coke? What about Pepsi? Right? And what are the physics or the chemistry that makes the Coke just spurt up all at once? Even the 5-year-olds kind of wondered, and I couldn't explain all of it, but I could kind of get into it a little bit. And this is why I use this image to represent this idea of a time for telling. I don't want you, sometimes lecturing gets a bad rap. I think students need explanations for things, but the literature says, and I'm getting this term from a paper by Schwartz and Bransford from 1998, that if you create a time for telling, that is if the students are really ready to hear and understand the explanation, it's going to have a lot more impact. And so this works in a couple ways. Let me give you a simple example with clickers. So again, kind of thinking of some kind of demonstration. In a lot of big chemistry classes, the instructor will do some type of demonstration at the front of the class, right? And it might involve something exploding or some fire or some noise. Usually it's dramatic. But also usually it's counterintuitive. And that's why they're doing the demonstration, to show some kind of chemical property. Now, a lot of chemistry instructors who use clickers will have students try to predict the outcome of that demonstration before they do it. And so the students may talk it out, they'll vote, they'll say, oh, it's going to light up, or it's not going to light up, or it's going to blow up, or it's not going to blow up. And then they do the demonstration. And again, often these demonstrations are not intuitive, so a lot of the students are wrong. So you see this bar chart that says 80% of the students thought this was going to happen. And instead this other thing happened. And now the students want to know why. Because not only was I wrong, but I can see that most everyone in the room was wrong. Right? So the results display of the clicker question adds some impact here. And they're ready to know why in a couple of ways. On the one hand, they're kind of motivationally ready. They've all been wrong, and they want to know why they were wrong. And so they want to hear the explanation. But by asking them to try to predict the outcome of this demonstration, you've asked them to think about the chemistry involved. And so they've got their gears turning. They're trying to remember what they know about this kind of stuff and what they don't know. And so they're cognitively more ready to understand the explanation that you would give at that point. And so that's the idea behind a time for telling. If you can create times in your class where your students are really ready, motivationally and cognitively, to understand your explanation, then they'll be ready to hear it. So clickers work very well for that. You may not be doing experiments, but this one's also chemistry, but there's no experiment involved. This one says, which flask will have the highest vapor pressure? A flask with a little bit of water, a flask with a lot of water, or are both the same? Now, this is from my colleague Adam List at Vanderbilt, and he tells me that actually vapor pressure doesn't depend on the volume of water present. It depends on the temperature. And so in this case, the correct answer is both are the same. Now, a lot of students get this wrong. So again, this is what I call a misconception question. And kind of one of the themes of my talk here is that clicker questions are often questions you wouldn't put on a test. You generally, and this is more philosophical, I guess, you don't put a question on the test generally hoping that most of the students get it wrong. Right? You may expect it, but you don't hope it. Right? But these types of questions work really well in class. You really hope that they get this wrong because, well, and you expect them to get it wrong too. You want them to kind of confront their own lack of understanding about something. So you can say, actually, no, this is wrong and here's why. So you've created that time for telling. And really, any time you ask a clicker question that a lot of students get wrong, you've created a little time for telling there. So, a lot of science examples. Let's shift gears a little bit. So, two women I interviewed for my book at Elon University, Risa Walsh and Amanda Tapler. They did this also kind of prediction question, but they did it in a health science class. How many alcoholic drinks, on average, do you think your peers consumed at their last social event? First question. Second question, how many alcoholic drinks did you consume at your last social event? So they asked the students to predict their own responses to the second question. And they said that consistently the students overestimate the amount of drinking that their peers do. So they miss the prediction, they get it wrong, okay? And what that does is that opens up the opportunity for a great discussion about alcoholism, about risk, about perception of risk. And so it sets the stage for a really nice class discussion about this kind of stuff. So you may be thinking about ways that you can have your students try to predict their own responses to some question. And anytime there's a mismatch, you've created a nice time for telling, a nice opportunity to dig deeper. Okay. So I hope that gets you thinking about questions you want your students to get wrong. Here's another type of question, student perspective questions. So these are very different. There are no right or wrong answers to these questions. Here's an example. So Philippa Levine, I interviewed her for my book. She teaches history at what I call the other USC. I grew up in South Carolina, so University of South Carolina is USC. There's that one on the West Coast too. But so her question, she teaches a course on the history of the evolution debates. Very contentious subject. And so she'll ask her students, which of the following statements most closely matches what you think? Humans evolved from other life forms with divine assistance. humans evolved from other life forms without divine assistance, or humans were created directly by a divine being within the past 10,000 years. Now here's the type of question that really benefits from the ability of clickers to provide anonymous responses. If you ask for a show of hands in your class on this question, you wouldn't get an accurate reading on these students. But the clicker questions allow them to respond, and then you get a nice bar chart, and everyone in the room gets to find out kind of who else is in the room. Now, Philippa actually uses this mostly so she can remind herself that there's probably a good chunk of students who don't agree with what she thinks, and she doesn't want to say anything that will totally offend them. So she's still going to confront them about their beliefs, but she uses this as a reminder to kind of watch her own language and watch what she says and how she presents things. Here's another example. So I interviewed Corley Brook for my book as well from Iowa State, Human Development and Family Studies. His first question is more kind of experiential. How many days a week do you get 30 minutes of exercise? The second is more of a what-if question. Your daughter is in an abusive relationship. Which of the following do you say to her? And she gives some options here. Now, this question at the end of a unit on abuse wouldn't necessarily be an opinion question. The students might have a lot of tools to try to think about what the right response is in that situation. But at the beginning of a unit, it's a nice opinion question to kind of get the students to think about the issues that you're going to talk about, to access their own prior knowledge and experience, to bring that to bear to class. Here's another example. I'm pretty sure this was Corley. She said, so she has a unit on adoption, and she asked her students how many of them were adopted. And students are often surprised to know how many people in the room were actually adopted. I think the national rate's like 5% or something. I mean, it's a little surprising to a lot of students. And the nice part is that she finds that typically the rate of students in the room matches what the textbook says is the national rate, which adds some validity to the textbook data for her students. But it also means that, and this is the thing in a lot of, particularly social science classes, you talk about a lot of kind of conceptual, theory-based material. It's fairly abstract for students. So if you can ask them some questions about their own personal experiences and their opinions prior to that, it can help them connect their own concrete experiences with the more abstract course material. And so it's a nice way to kind of hook them into the discussion. Here's another set of questions, and I love sharing Matthew Freeman's work. He's not in academia at all. He works in Richmond. He calls himself a community facilitator. He tends to work with groups of people in a town or county or neighborhood. Often they're dealing with contentious issues, often around race or politics or something, or poverty. And he'll have 50 people in a room, and his job is to help them better understand each other and maybe come to some consensus around some really tough questions. He uses clickers to help the people in his groups learn about each other and to really kind of bust some misconceptions that they sometimes have about each other. So, for instance, he might start with some demographic questions. What's your household income, or what's your race? And then, this is really interesting, what percentage of the nation are persons of color? This is not a factual recall question. He doesn't care what the right answer is. He cares what is the perception of the right answer in the room, which I think is nice and subtle. And then maybe an experiential question. How long has it been since you witnessed behavior you thought was a result of racial prejudice? And TurningPoint will let you do this. You can slice and dice the results from that by maybe some of the demographic data from earlier in the session. And so he can see, oh, people from this race have these responses. And so he uses this, like I say, to help people in the room get to know each other, to help bust some misconceptions or myths that they might have about each other. It's hard for people to kind of come together if they don't really share with each other and get to know each other a little bit. And you can imagine asking similar types of questions in a lot of college classes where you're dealing with sensitive issues, and you want to give students a chance to share their perspectives, their opinions, their experiences, and then to kind of make some sense of all of that together. Here's a nice way I think about this. So if I were to just ask these questions without clickers, if we weren't in the all skate mode, but I just asked for a few people to share their experiences. Well, so here's my metaphor. Each hat represents a student, okay? These are hats from Turkey, actually. So I hear from a student, and he says, here's my experience, here's my opinion. And then I hear from another student volunteer, and she says, this is my experience, this is my opinion. And then maybe I hear from a third student volunteer, blah, blah, blah. Well, what I've done is I've heard from 3 of my students, but I haven't heard from all of the others. And I don't know if you noticed, but the hats that I showed you, it's a little hard with this lighting, but they were all purple.
Yeah.
The students who speak up in front of their peers aren't necessarily representative of everyone in the class, as you well know. And so by giving all students a chance to vote in and respond and contribute their opinion and their perspective, you get a much clearer sense of who's really in the room. They get a much clearer sense of who's really in the room. The other thing that's nice is that when you start to react to the bar chart, it's a nice bar chart, isn't it? I was actually looking for a bar chart to show, and I was looking on Flickr, and I found this. And the person who posted it on Flickr was a guy named Tony Kreider, who I interviewed for my book. Small world. His daughter Zoe did this. So. I'm very proud of Zoe. The nice thing about having the data on these kind of student perspective questions is that then you can have a class discussion that kind of reacts more to the data and less to the individual. So you don't have to kind of get personal in ways that are unproductive. You can say, well, it looks like a lot of you think green is your favorite color. Why would someone pick green here? Why might someone pick green, right? I mean, that's a different question to say, why might someone pick green? I mean, seeing so many greens says this is an opinion that a number of people in the room have. We should pay some attention to it. It's not some fringe opinion. I mean, people actually in this room have this opinion. But then to ask a question, not why did you pick green, but why might someone pick green? You started to open it up for anyone to contribute to that discussion, not just the people who pick green, who may frankly still be a little bit wary about contributing to the discussion depending on the question. So this gets really subtle, and leading classroom discussions on sensitive topics is challenging, certainly. But I think the clickers give you a way to hear from more students and to kind of react to the opinions that are really in the room and not just the opinions of a few. And so I think it gives you a useful tool for doing that.
So say that I have had all my students register their clickers, because I do want to do things like attendance and quizzes as well as these other things.
Yeah.
Is there a way for me to quickly show them that this is anonymous, because I do a lot of personal politics in my classes?
Yes. Yeah. I think it was maybe last year's release of TurningPoint. They added a feature that makes it pretty easy to decide that this question coming up is in total anonymous mode. Yeah.
And I can show them.
And you can show your
because
students that.
Because I need to build trust over
Yeah, because they need to believe you when you say that it's in anonymous mode. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah. And so, I mean, you may find that you want to use clickers in anonymous mode all the time, depending. But yes, you can kind of switch back and forth. Another question?
Yeah. For those of us in the sciences, I guess our major interest in this technique is, the bottom line, if you conduct a class with liberal use of the clicker technique, and you have alternative ways of spending lecture hours, this is one way to spend it.
Sure.
There are many different other ways of doing it. If you give the same exam to students who take clickers versus alternatives, is there a difference in the performance of one over the other, and which one? That's a question for you, A, B, C, or D.
That's the hardcore question, right? Is there educational research in a control group style study that shows that using clickers in particular ways leads to greater performance on exams? That's what you're asking,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I want to hear what you have to say, and then I'll weigh in.
Oh, it's okay. I just wanted to, I know what he's asking. I know what department he's in, and he needs to look at the results in the literature written by a guy named Hake.
Richard Hake, yeah. Richard Hake's study provided, I think, very conclusive evidence that interactive active learning strategies in the introductory science classrooms work better than traditional lecture methods.
That's not what I'm asking.
But that's not what you're asking. That's not what I heard either, was that I could do clickers or I could do other things that are also active.
Right.
Right. Those studies, to my knowledge, haven't been conducted in the rigorous way that I think you would want them to have been conducted.
Yeah.
So,
That's
my quick answer.
That there would be no advantage of clickers in the end over alternatives, interactive types of approaches to the material in physics.
Potentially. The other thing I'd point out, though, here is that, so sometimes I hear people say, oh, what's the evidence that clickers work? And I kind of say, well, what's the evidence that chalkboards work? I mean, it depends on how you use it, right? And so what I would argue is that if you're being mindful of the preconceptions and prior knowledge that students bring into the classroom, if you're surfacing that in useful ways, if you're responding to that, if you're having students engage with the material, There's a lot of tools to do that. You can use clickers without doing any of that, right? And so that's what I'm trying to kind of talk about, are ways to use clickers in very productive ways that tap into what we do know from the educational research literature about what leads to more effective learning environments, which is formative assessment, getting to know your students, engaging them with the material, leveraging the power of the community, those types of things.
Derek?
Yes?
There are some studies that show that peer discussion, the peer instruction part that often goes along with clickers does actually result in better learning. So you could do it without the clickers. But Eric Mazur's work with peer instruction with the clickers, Carl Wyman's work.
But again, I don't know if they were comparing peer instruction to some other active learning or peer instruction to a very non-active learning, which is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, but they have shown, for example, that well, this is sort of connected, but the rationale behind why it helps, why more students converge to the right answer. There's a study by Wood and Wyman and some other folks that show that the talking about the question itself, you can run the statistics in the class, talking about the question with their peers helps students do better on additional clicker questions on the topic, even if they didn't get the initial questions right. Even if there was nowhere at their table who got the initial questions right. The mere act of talking about the concept seemed to eventually cause students to process cognitively and improve. So that's not a comparison.
I mean, there's some mechanisms here that, yeah, if you kind of implemented those same mechanisms without clickers, then they might have similar results. I think for some faculty, clickers give them a really useful tool for motivating students to engage in these activities and for kind of framing it and making it happen. Here's my all-time favorite clicker study, which isn't quite what you were talking about, but a couple of guys named Stoll and Nelson had some psychology students. They put them into 3 different groups, and each group experienced the same lecture, 1-hour lecture on some material. At the end of the lecture, they took a quiz, a pencil and paper quiz on the material that they had just learned about. During the hour, they answered questions along the way. One group with clickers, another group through a show of hands, and another group through, they would write their answer A, B, C, or D on an index card and kind of show it up to the instructor, so kind of the flashcard approach. And what they found was that all 3 groups of students did about as well on the quiz after the lecture. That they all got like 60% of the questions right or something after the lecture. That's how much they retained from that 1-hour lecture. If you looked at how well the students did on the in-lecture questions, the students who expressed their answers through a show of hands, they got them right at about 98%. The clickers, only like 78, 80%. So if you were the instructor and you asked a question and 98% of your students got it right, you would assume that they understood it. But then those same students only made a 60 on the quiz at the end of the hour, right? So you would have been overestimating their comprehension through the show of hands method. The clicker method gave you a much more accurate reading on how well students actually understood things. Their clicker scores were a lot closer to their quiz scores. In fact, what was kind of surprising was that the flashcard method was more like the hand raising than like the clickers. And I think with the real power here, I mean, you can imagine with the show of hands, right? What are most of your students going to do when you ask for a show of hands on the right answer? They're going to see what those, whoever they think has the right answer, they're just going to copy them, right? And so you get this kind of effect. But with the clickers, you get independent responses. And the flashcard method was not independent enough, in a sense. And so this is where the research gets a little subtle, because what's the kind of learning benefit of you as the instructor having a better knowledge during class of how well your students are following? Well, if you don't do anything about it, well, there's no benefit. But if you react to that and you do something a little bit different, then you may be able to respond to them more explicitly. In fact, let me give you a couple of images. I'll go off my path here for a second. I was planning to do this at the end, but so this is a metaphor I use a lot. Does anyone know what this picture is?
My computer.
Yeah, it's an X-ray. Someone once said it's a satellite photo. Like, not bad, but no, this is a laptop. It's a MacBook. It's been X-rayed. I like to say that I don't know what's inside of my laptop unless I go in and look, either with an X-ray or a hammer. I need to kind of uncover and see what's there. In the same way, I don't really know what's going on in my students' heads unless I make some effort to uncover that and make it more visible. And clicker questions give you a tool for doing that during class. You don't have to wait until that first homework assignment or that first test to find out what they don't get. You can find out what they understand, what they don't understand, what misconceptions they have during class when you have a chance to respond to it. Now, that's what I like to call agile teaching. So I like this guy doing some kind of... I'm always a little wary about using skateboard metaphors because every skateboarder I've ever seen ends with someone falling down. Like, they do a cool trick, but then they fall down. So let's not think about that. But this idea of agility, that you're going to need to respond on your feet to what's happening. Now, it's not total kind of chaos here, right? Because you're the one asking the questions. You know if they get this question wrong, you're probably going to need to talk about this. You wrote the wrong answers, so you may think, oh, a lot of them are probably going to go for D, so we want to be able to address this. But it does mean responding during class to what you're learning about your students' learning during class. And so there's this agility thing. And what I haven't seen in the educational research is anything that kind of tries to capture this agile teaching element. And I think that's one of the more powerful elements of the clicker pedagogy. Ooh, lots of talk. Okay, let's hear from you.
So one very simple reason for using clickers is that a large lecture format, both without clickers and with clickers, very easy way to get more bodies in the classroom. So without clickers, late semester, about half the students in the class will attend. With clickers, you encourage attendance with points, and it's 80–90%.
Yeah, but my answer to you is that unless there's a bottom line improvement at the end of the day, which is the final exam, what good is it?
Well, hopefully, yeah, I mean, so hopefully you're doing a good job of teaching and you're giving them
What I'm
something that
saying
helps
is
them
unless
better.
you have it.
That would imply that there's some value in attending class, right? You're assuming that.
Because I could argue that the students in clickers are as anonymous as no-shows. I mean, you don't know who's clicking what, who's there. Even if you vote, there's no responsibility for the vote.
Well, no, you do. I mean, I can pull up a list after class and see all of my students and exactly how each student voted.
Oh, you can? So
Yeah.
it's not anonymous?
No, it can be anonymous, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. You can track them completely.
It's
Yeah.
anonymous to each other in the classroom.
Yeah, it's anonymous, so they don't see each other's results. They just see the bar chart. But you as the instructor can pull up all the details after class and find out exactly how students voted. And in fact, some instructors will do that as kind of an early warning sign. 2 or 3 weeks in, if you have a few students who are missing a lot of clicker questions, you'll be able to know, right? Halfway, but well before that first test. Another comment.
One other piece of data, and I think it might be unpublished, when Mazur was here, he said that, and I think it was his longitudinal data on teaching intro physics, they assessed retention of the material after the class. And he said the discouraging thing was everybody forgets all of the material.
Yeah.
But that people who had used the active learning method retained it longer. The slope was different then. And really, those of us in intro classes, all we want to do is get them to remember some of it for the next class in the semester.
Yeah. I had an engineering professor tell me once, because at Vanderbilt, the engineering students take calculus in the math department and then go take engineering courses. And he said, it's like when they leave the math department, the math building, the calculus just evaporates from their heads. Edit that, please. All right, I want to move on. I want to talk about another couple of clicker question types that I want to throw in the mix here, because they're also really interesting. So we've talked about misconception questions and student perspective questions. Critical thinking questions. So misconception questions have single correct answers. Student perspective questions have no correct answers. These are questions that have multiple correct answers, or maybe some answers better than others. So here's an example. I interviewed Stuart Beatty from pharmacology at the Ohio State University. And this is a diagnostic question. Don't worry about the details. Patient comes in and you have this data. You need to make a decision, a diagnosis. Which of these is the most likely reason for his high morning sugar levels? And Stuart tells me that I think 2 of these answers are actually pretty good. I mean, this patient comes in, you have incomplete data. You don't have the whole picture. And so there's more than one possible answer here. Some of these answers are flat out wrong. Some are better than others. But this is pretty realistic. I mean, if you're teaching nursing students or pharmacy students, you never have all the data you'd like. You still have to make a decision. And so this is a really nice kind of question. Here's an example from a very different discipline, English. I interviewed Elizabeth Cullingford for my book. She teaches at UT Austin. she'll have students read Hamlet, and then she'll put up a passage from Hamlet, something that Hamlet says after Ophelia dies. Spoiler alert, sorry. Doesn't make it. And so the question is, what's Hamlet's motivation in saying what he does here? Is it that he loved Ophelia and he's so distraught to learn of her death that he proposes to eat a crocodile? Is it this? Is it this? And so she has her students vote, and they have to kind of think, okay, given what I know of the text, what's Hamlet's motivation here? What's my gut say? And then she pulls up the big screen and the results. Now, Elizabeth actually says she teaches about 200 students at once in English literature, which I don't know how you pull that off, but she manages to do it. She doesn't actually use clickers a lot for discussion necessarily, but she'll pull up the bar chart, and then she'll find whichever of these three answers was least popular, and then she'll play devil's advocate and tell them why there's evidence in the text for that answer. And in fact, for this question, she says there's a good evidence for all three of these in the text. Hamlet's motivations are pretty mysterious throughout the play, and it's something that you just got to make sense of. And so, I mean, this is really interesting. Think of a multiple choice question with no single correct answer. That's a little disruptive. Here's one more example. This one's from me. Look, there I am. So I'm a mathematician, but I've gotten to teach a course on the history and math of cryptography a couple of times, so codes and code breaking. And so it's fun. I get to pretend to be a history professor for a little bit. So one of the questions I asked my students was, which of the following was the most significant factor in the Allies' cryptography victory over Germany in World War II? You might have heard of the Enigma machine. You know, the Germans kind of lost the battle when it came to cryptography. The British folks at Bletchley Park cracked their codes. So why was that? And I gave my students some answers here. Now, all four of these answers are defensible. I mean, there's arguments to be made for any of these. But what I want my students to do is I want them to think about and to weigh these alternatives, to pick the one that they think is most significant or the one that they can argue the best, and then commit to it. And then we look at the results and we have a class discussion. Now, on a test, I wouldn't put this question. It's a failure as a test question. I could have an essay question that says, why did the Germans lose the cryptography battle? What were the key reasons? And have them talk about it. But that essay question in class can turn into a multiple choice question with a lot of discussion. And the critical reasoning and the argumentation that I want my students to do, that happens in the small group and the class-wide discussion. This question frames it and kind of motivates it. You know, think about if we used a peer instruction technique with this. I have you commit to an answer independently, then you talk about it with your neighbor, and maybe you change your mind, maybe you don't, but then you go. Then we have a class discussion. Not only have you had a chance to think about the question yourself, commit to something, you've had a chance to vet your ideas with another student, and now when we move to the class discussion, you're much more likely to have something to contribute to that class discussion. You've had time to think about it, to vet your ideas. You can say, we think the answer is this, not I think the answer is this. This is all pretty powerful stuff. And then you as the instructor get to look at the results and say, okay, a lot of you went with this. Let me hear why. Some folks who said D, some folks who said B. Maybe someone who changed their mind. Why did you change your mind? This type of stuff. So you've got some data that you can respond to in class. Quick question.
This is a really good example of a question that works whether it's a big class or a little class. A lot of clicker lore is clickers are great for big classes, and there are more and more data coming out now that shows that they're really useful not only for smaller classes but even for advanced smaller classes like graduates.
Yeah. I mean, there's a, so Dennis Jacobs talks about clickers. He teaches chemistry at Notre Dame, and he uses the phrase, you have to pick your pony, like you're at the racetrack. Like, I'm asking you to commit to one of these. So if you commit, if you press B, you kind of have to be ready to defend B, particularly in a small class, right? Where it's much more likely that you're going to be called on, and you're going to have to defend. So what's going on here? Now, thinking more of kind of the freshmen who come in, maybe big intro classes, a lot of students who come to college have this absolutist idea. The world is black and white. Every problem has a single correct answer. Their job is to memorize it when you say it, and then give it back to you on a test, right? Now, these multiple choice questions disrupt this because they don't have single correct answers. So students who are kind of thinking their job is to memorize the right answers and move on, they're going to have to kind of move away from that to make sense of these types of one best answer questions. Other students have this relativistic point of view. I love this picture. What's the best color of M&M? Okay, that really is just opinion, okay? But they come to class thinking that it's all just opinion, There's no really one right answer. Every professor has their own kind of opinion on everything. As long as I BS my way through this essay, it doesn't matter what I say. Some of the students come to class with that. Now, these multiple choice questions, these critical thinking questions, disrupt that too, because some answers are wrong and some answers are better than others. So it's not all just opinion. We have ways in our disciplines of assessing the quality of a response or an argument. We have standards, we have ways of knowing in our discipline, and we want our students to kind of start to learn how to do that. And so they can help move students to this more evaluative mindset where they are making arguments, they are reasoning from evidence, and they're using the standards of quality in our discipline. And so these critical thinking questions, these one best answer questions, have a lot of power. Okay, one more type, and then I've got a quicker question for you. So pure assessment questions. So I don't know if you can tell here, it's a little dim, but those are monster trucks in the background. So these folks are voting in a monster truck rally. So a lot of instructors have students share their work with each other, whether it's peer review in a writing class, or groups of students that do presentations and the other students listen and critique, or maybe it's art or design or dance where students are kind of performing or sharing their work with each other. What I hear from a lot of instructors who do this is that the students are often hesitant to critique each other. That I think a lot of it is that, hey, I'm not going to critique your presentation because I know I'm going to be up there and I don't really want to have to deal with it myself. And so this image of everyone kind of giving the monster truck an 8 seems somehow apt. It was great! And you're thinking, we want to have a real discussion about this thing that the students just did and actually kind of dig into the meat of it, and they're all saying it was fine. We need to kind of go beyond that. Well, clickers can enable you to do that. So I've talked to a few faculty who use clickers to make it easier for students to critique each other. Again, because of the anonymity. So Corey Street, she teaches humanities at Mount Royal University. She had a project where students had to watch a film on the Holocaust. And they had to analyze the film in terms of its historiographical relevancy. So how accurately did it represent the facts and interpretations of the facts and the history as we know it. And they gave these presentations. So she'd have the student group do their presentation, and then the other students would have their clickers and then would have to respond. What grade would you give this? How well did the group address the relevant historiographical issues? According to the rubric, how would you rate this group's clarity of presentation? And what she found is that the students will actually be a bit more honest when they have the anonymity of the clickers. And some of the students will say, you know, it wasn't that good, and let's talk about this. And she wants to have those conversations about how to make this better. But if she can't get the students to kind of admit that there's something here, it's hard to do that. Here's another example. So in this cryptography course, it was not only did it have history, but I had to teach my students writing. It was a first year writing seminar too. So I had to learn how to teach writing last year too. I know you can't see the details, but this is the general structure of my rubric for their first paper assignment. We had different categories, importance of question, relevance of argument, clarity of opinion, and then levels of quality within those categories, poor, acceptable, good, or excellent. And so what I had my students do was I had a volunteer. He shared his paper with the whole class. They all read his paper, and then they marked it up according to my rubric. So for each category, was it poor, acceptable, good, or excellent? And I have these descriptions in each box. And then I had the students vote with their clickers. So this was one of the results. So his voice, was it kind of appropriately academic? Was it not too formal and not too informal? And so the students, most of the students thought, I'll call him Sam. Most of the students thought Sam did pretty good here. But there were some students who thought it was only acceptable. Now, I don't know for sure, but I suspect that if I just asked for comments on Sam's paper, these people might not have said much. But when they see that a third of the class thinks there's a weak spot here, they're more willing to kind of share and say, well, here's what I didn't like about it. Here's where I thought it could be improved. Now, Sam's in the mix. Sam's defending himself. I think Sam rated himself acceptable here, too. Like, he was like, whatever, this is, I know I need to work on this. It was the first draft of the paper. But this was nice. I think it helped the students contribute in a meaningful way, because you know what? We needed to talk about what was an appropriate voice for this type of writing assignment. And if the students aren't willing to say, there's something here, then it's harder to have that conversation. This one made Sam feel very good. He established the importance of his question very well. Everyone agreed on that. I agreed on that too. That was nice. This one was an interesting one. How did Sam make a personal connection to his topic, which was on kind of information security and privacy? Now the students were all over the board here. And this was good because this shows me that they don't really understand what it means to make a personal connection to the topic in the way that I understand what that means as their instructor. And so they saw this and they're like, okay, Dr. Bruff, what did you rate him? We need to know. And so it opened up a great door to have a conversation about the standards of quality as I saw them in writing in this discipline. So that was really powerful. That's a nice time for telling idea. Okay. So here's your clicker question. We've talked about misconception questions, student perspective questions, critical thinking questions, and peer assessment questions. Take a minute, talk it out with your neighbor. Which of these question types would you like to try in your teaching? Maybe you're already using clickers and you're thinking of doing something different. Maybe you're not using clickers. Which of these appeals the most to you? Think about how it might play out in your teaching. I'll let you vote, and then we'll see where you are. Go.
And then you can unpack it. I don't know.
Okay, I want to respect your time, so if you would go ahead and vote. We got about a minute left, so go ahead and vote. Let me know what you're thinking. Feel free, grab a clicker, give me a vote, tell me what you vote twice.
Give me two.
You know, we've had some discussions over the value of clickers.
But that's going to slow you down in your class.
I mostly wanted to help you think about some options for using this tool, for changing a little bit what you do in the classroom. I think sometimes it's pretty easy for us as instructors to kind of lock into what we're doing and not to really think of ourselves as creative agents in the teaching process. But we have a lot of options. Clickers are, for a lot of folks, they find them more flexible and more versatile than you would think at first. And so I wanted to kind of expand your repertoire a little bit and give you some food for thought as you think about using clickers in your own teaching and helping your students really grapple with the material. So thank you for your time and attention and participation today.